You also started at a time which I feel is very interesting for the space, right? There's a time when this whole concept of content that could be online came in. Things you can actually kind of make in the space kind of started to happen. I remember seeing the first set of pieces you guys made as well, and wondering, okay, this is, it seems fresh. It seems like something which I haven't seen before, and we were all like, I think early days of Glitch just come out of music television, doing stuff for brands, and like should do more stuff like that. And I remember at least two people out of our then I would say 15, 20 member team walking up saying, why can't we do more independent stuff? I'm like, that's not our business, right? do, how much do you attribute that period to, like, there were some points that were just luck kind of paid off, saying these are opportunities that kind of showed up, and how much of it was planned? Okay, like we had a hypothesis, it paid off. If you had to go break it down to
I
that.
think they're linked, right, Varun? I mean, my wife laughs when I say this because I'm a lazy guy, but I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. And we worked very hard. Like, I have to give ourselves credit for that. We didn't have a very clear idea of what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to build. I think originally the idea with Pocket Aces was to build a movie studio because we felt the studio system was broken. There was a few ways to fix it, but only when we understood how deep the rot was and how uh, the incentives prevented anyone from letting that get fixed did we realize, hey, this might not be the best use of our time. We've got two reasonably well-educated guys putting 16, 18 hours of their day into this thing, and eventually a third person would show up and do the same thing, and we're like, we can't waste that time trying to fix a system where everybody is trying to make sure the status quo persists, right? So the move to digital content happened out of necessity. It happened because we knew we could raise money. We had like the understanding of um, venture capital, private equity. We'd worked in these fields. I'd worked in VC before. I'd worked in PE before. So had Anirudh. And Aditi was doing an investing job in Impact, in fact. So we had a good sense for, that we could present a business case to somebody and get somebody to support this financially. But then I can't take that money and go after the film studios because they're just like, overpaid executives working, 4 hours a day and often don't know their head from their ass. Almost every film executive I've met here is like that. And in contrast, the TV guys, I think, were a lot more clued in and understood a lot more about, because they were used to data. They would see their audiences and they would study numbers. And the film guys were just like, which way is the wind blowing today?
Yeah,
Okay, this is what I'm
exactly.
going
Yeah.
to do. And I'm like,
And the
fuck.
data you would get, and I remember there was the time, around that time, you would get this one weekly, I forget what it's called. You'd get this one print thing with data numbers on film and television. The television was still like what about
Yeah, there was
10?
that, was it Super Cinema, one of those magazines that would
Yeah,
send you
and you
like the
get this
trade
random
report.
magazine which had data on cinema numbers, and I would be one of those people sitting and reading that because I
Yeah,
was
same.
intrigued by it,
Yeah.
but it never made any sense. Like none of the data had
But
any like.
there's actually a lot of interesting insights out of that data. And I think what the film executives were able to do is some of that became instinct for them, but they could never, like, it's like I can draw something in a graph, but if I tell you write the equation for this graph, you have no idea how to do that, right? That's kind of what is happening for them. They could draw the graph, but they couldn't draw the underlying equation. When Ani and I spent time studying these numbers, and we did it as a daily exercise, we'd study every single number that would come out, and we'd get numbers of 3, 4 different sources, triangulate. You could start seeing a pattern. There was a point after which we could very quite accurately predict how films would do depending on a few key factors. Right? We would, try to quantify the buzz and this and that. We look at some social media stats. Um, and we had a pretty good sense of like, okay, this opening day one is likely to be between this range and that range. And we would almost always get it right. So we would compete. We would, bet against each other who'd get it closer. But even the guy who lost would often be pretty close. So I think there is some kind of insights to be derived from there. There's a high amount of correlation between a few data points, but none of that mattered because the distribution was controlled by kind of the talent. Financing was only provided when the talent was available, and so everything just got talent took all the value. And I felt like that didn't make sense because you go to like the US market, and of course there's the 1% talent takes huge value there, right? The Tom Cruise movies, Tom Cruise is the most expensive part of the Tom Cruise movie, right? And that's fine. But for a majority of actors, that wasn't the case. Like there were guys who built their careers on like the video cassette movie, right, or the straight to home or direct to home, DVDs or whatever. You didn't have that industry here. It's starting to form now, 10 years later. But I think that for us, like the goal was, look, try to understand this business from the inside. If you don't think this is fixable, anything can be fixed if the incentives are aligned. I feel like I'm a huge believer in the fact that people behave the way they're incentivized to do so. And I just thought the incentives in the film business were terrible. I mean, I was in an organization where, guys who were making 3, 4, or 5 lakhs annually were buying like 3 BHKs, right? Like you knew that money was not coming from their salary, right? So,
And suddenly show up with a very swanky new car, and
yeah,
you'd be
I
like, where did
remember
that come from?
the Mahindra had the XUV launch around then, right? It was the big one, XUV 500 or whatever it's called. And these 2, 3 guys showing up in these SUVs, I'm like, boss, your salary can't be more than 5 or 6 lakhs annually. How the hell are you affording a 10, 15 lakh car? Like,
And there's a layer to it, right? And what you often don't understand, and anybody who comes in to the business realizes, is that the difference between the Indian industry and anything globally is that we are unstructured by design.
it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, exactly. It's a feature that you are so unstructured in every aspect, from how the studios are in terms of actually, and how the shoot spaces are, how vendor management happens, how even like how do you. I remember once I was having this very intense conversation with production head, and he had this smile because he's been in the industry for a long time. And I was like, why can't we get people? And I was very naive in hindsight. I said, why can't we just get everybody? We'll give them all bottles. Can't they just come and fill up their own water? Simple ask in hindsight. He said, you know how many people come on a set? I said, I know. He said, but just think about how many people come on the set. How many of them are repeats? Some of them this. So the average Indian set, I think post-pandemic has changed a bit. You would have people for jobs which had no reason to be jobs.
Yeah, it's like at the airports. Have you seen the guys that like you walk over to the boarding pass scanner and there's a guy there to just look at it and there's another guy to scan it for you? Like that should be a 0% job, but there are 2 people employed by that job.
Here's like one guy's job is just come, as you enter, he gives you that small bottle of water. That's one guy's job. And then beyond that, it's how safety is structured. How like you can, I think that's like that's a podcast series to itself.
Yeah, by itself, yeah. Call me.
But when you come back, yeah, exactly. And you come back and you say, okay, you don't have to break all of those norms, but there's a better way to actually create the product itself. And I feel that's what's happened since around the time when you guys started off as well to now.
We did it consciously. Like that was all very so because we didn't know anything about the production business, right? Even in my time at Reliance Entertainment and when I was setting up Jungli Pictures, I wasn't knee deep into the production itself. I was more like a corporate executive, so I was more focused on kind of set up the structure, set up the film, set up the economics, and then let the teams go and execute. At Pocket Aces, when we did our first shoot, is when I understood the true chaos that happens on set, right? And both Anirudh and I looked at each other, and we had hired somebody from the industry to run our production, and this really great woman called Juhi, and we said, Juhi, why do we need all these people there? She said, no, it's just normal. That's how things are. And so then we sat down and we actually sat with her and we broke down what actually happens and why are these people needed. And eventually she came to the conclusion, based on the questions we were asking, that we don't need so many people. And then we shot. We did a series called Not Fit, which was a 10-part mockumentary series. It was one of the first mockumentaries anyone had done in India. We shot the damn thing with a 18-person crew. Unheard of. And even today, I don't think I'll be able to do that anymore because, again, we've gone back to that kind of, that size and scale, that the inefficiencies that kind of film had gotten to. And, honestly, like, no one was like working more than they work on a regular film set. Everyone was working the same amount. We just got it done with less people. So we learned that you can do more with less if you ask the right questions and you question everything and break down these things into first principles. And so there was a lot of that involved. And then, of course, there were a few key bets, right? Like you have to have a hypothesis and test those things, right? So a couple of key things that really, like, I feel like people often operate wearing blinkers and they don't look left and right, or they don't ask the right questions, or they behave like, with herd mentality. And every new content channel or content company that would start would say, hey, YouTube, and we're going to build YouTube and this and that. And, we were reading in the press that Facebook was keen to launch their own native video player, because what was happening back then, if you remember, is people would create a video on YouTube, then they would put the link on Facebook, which would let you embed YouTube links,
Yeah. At
much to
that
their
time.
own loss. And then that's where the discovery would happen. So you would discover it on your social feed, and then you would click and go outside that universe and watch it on YouTube's feed. It didn't make sense that Facebook would let that happen for too long. And so we took that bet. We said Facebook won't let that happen for too long. So let's invest in Facebook native video. So we became the early like viral content creators on Facebook video back in 2014, 2015. And then Facebook suddenly gave us MFN status. They were like on the phone with us often talking about, hey, how are you doing this? How are you creating that? How are you, running the newsfeed? How are you making sure the newsfeed delivers your content to people? So these were just bets we took. And they're not hard bets to take because the cost of failure is zero. So what if you get it wrong? Just go back to YouTube and do it like everyone else is doing it. Right? You have nothing to lose, but nobody's taking those bets. People were just so committed. I mean, there was some like YouTube had funded a bunch of these channels. So Google Ventures had put in money into a few companies and channels to only create content for YouTube. That's fine. I get that. You're financially incentivized to behave that way. But I had no financial incentive to do that. I was a venture funded or a family office funded business. I could take these calls on my own. And so we took those bets. And I think we got lucky because we were smart and hardworking enough to take those bets. So that happened multiple times. It wasn't just the one time. It was that way till we raised our next round of funding. That way for a bunch of key decisions. That way when we took a call to start Loco, and how we did that too. We could have gone down and built our own, gaming app, but we found a really smart team doing that already in Bangalore. So we went and acquired the team versus building it ourselves. So you got to kind of take these calls, and you'll get many of them wrong, more of them wrong than right. But if there's some thought to it, I think you get lucky quite often.
One of the things which, from what you're just saying, and when I've seen you guys evolve over time, is that there's this common thought process that you got to pick one lane as a business or as a person, stick to that and go deep into. That's how you kind of grow. And that he said a lot more about businesses now. I think people say it less about individuals because the assumption is what's your side hustle, all that stuff comes in. But even for businesses, what we often don't look at is that you don't have to stick to one thing that you do, and one area of focus. Like you guys have just been able to expand towards multiple spaces and evolve, and that actually makes you seem a lot more balanced as well.
Although that's true, I wish that wasn't the case. Right? I wish that India economically allowed you to kind of build depth. I just don't think this market has that much depth yet, right? If you really like beneath all these great, okay, we're the largest population in the world now and most young people and all, we're for most businesses that are not kind of very mass medium businesses, just like the content we create is not, I mean, it's mainstream, but it's not like the 1.2 to 1.5 billion people are not watching it. It's the top kind of 100 million people that from an income perspective that are actually consuming it. I think most of these businesses cater to 100 million people. So we're not a 1.5 billion person economy. We are for all the problems that we have, population challenges, we have low GDP per capita, we have all of those issues like a 1.5 billion population country does. But our economic might, unfortunately, is limited to 100 million people that transact and that purchase and that have disposable income and that can actually continue to fuel the economy. And so I wish we could create more depth, and I wish we could do one thing and do it so well that we were just experts at that one thing. But unfortunately, India doesn't give you. There's no depth in revenue. You can't. I was in the US last year, and I was at one of those strip malls, that has many stores, and there was a store that just had. It was like a large superstore, like the size of one of these hypermarts we have in Bombay. So, 20 different aisles, and each aisle goes down 50, 100 feet. It was just for kayaking and canoeing equipment and accessories. Just that. You wouldn't even find fishing equipment there. Just kayaking and canoeing. And it was a chain. It wasn't like a standalone mom and pop shop. It was like a chain. They had stores in multiple zip codes. And I was just thinking, I'm like, how much depth does the canoeing and kayaking, industry have in America with some total of 300 million people or 400 million people? We can't do that we can't even have sporting goods chains in India yet. We don't have that kind of depth, right? So I wish we could build that, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we'll get there. I'm very optimistic, but you have to build multiple revenue lines as a result, right? So we have these. We have the content we create for advertisers, but then advertisers are not going to spend shit ton of money on just this one medium, and so then okay, we have talent management, and so we have these influencers. Can you spend some money through that pocket? And then it's like, hey, who else is willing to spend money on content? Hey, it's the streaming platforms. Let's go to them. So you kind of have to find all the sources of revenue aggregated, and then it kind of amounts to something. That's just the nature of our economy so far. I think that'll change. I'm already seeing it change.
I also brought that up because that's often where, especially in India, people get it wrong, is that you assume there is depth without realizing there is not depth. And there's almost a call you have to take as an individual and as an entrepreneur, right? Is that it's not about you, it's about making the business grow and sustain. And to take the, I feel it's often an ego thing as well, right? You believe that, no, and I find this very often lately, is that someone says that I'm building this for this, and that's all that's what we're going deep into. And it doesn't matter how the economics seem, everything else. But the fact that what you just said, that you have to be this way for this,
I mean,
it's a call that you take.
it's a call you take depending on what your objective is, right?
Yeah.
Like if your objective is to do something that fulfills you a certain way without emphasizing the economic return, if let's say if that's your own investment, your own money, then I think it's fine to do that too. I think it's nice, in fact, if somebody has that purpose driven. Uh, for me and for the companies that I run, we have a fiduciary responsibility, right, to shareholders. We have taken external capital. We have shareholders beyond the three of us, and so we are meant to generate returns. So I have to think about this from a economic POV as well. It's not like I'm not like, yes, there are things we don't do even for economic returns, right? I won't do propaganda content, or I won't do something very religious or political, or something incendiary, right? Because those are the value systems that we'll kind of create and use that to mark the line. But outside of that, I have to think economically. I have to think, we're a for-profit enterprise. We're meant to generate returns to all shareholders. And so it doesn't allow us then the freedom to simply focus on one thing and go really deep. I mean, I'm really passionate about storytelling. I enjoy the shows that I get to show run and the shows that I create. If I had my way, I would just sit and do that all day long. I would do one show a year, sit on the beach the rest of the time, have a great life. But I don't get to do that because that's not. Then I should fund that lifestyle myself, right? I can't go take venture funding, take a salary from a company, and then just kind of do that. So I feel like that depth argument is for people who are, you know, who are focusing on economic returns, because there is only. I still think there's only one way to generate economic returns, is to find multiple sources of revenue and really build as much depth as you can with each line. There are businesses, however, that are single source revenue stream and they do well, but those are very few. There are very few markets in India, very few markets or sectors in India where there's that kind of depth. I mean, I think education to some degree has depth. I think religion is a great business and has depth, but there's not a lot of sectors like media and content certainly isn't one of those.
Want more such insights? Make sure you check out the full episode.